No, I don't think so.
Okay. So, right, who else have we got now? We've got Goff. Any news from you, lovely, this week?
Well, only my, as I just mentioned, my trip to Wick to the St James's Church. It's done up since I was there last, and we'll wash the walls, and they've got a huge stone in the altar, and I hadn't noticed it, and I worshipped there for 25 years, but I hadn't noticed because it was so manky, and they've grit blasted it, and it looks absolutely wonderful. And it's so well worth a visit. Yeah.
Where is it? Where is it?
Yeah, Wick Church.
Wick?
Yes, St James, yes.
Oh, you lived in Wick?
I lived in Wick for 28 years.
Oh, what do you believe?
They threw me out.
Hmm?
They threw me out. Yeah.
Oh, I threw you out.
Drug offenders.
It was actually a woman, the reason why he left.
Oh, right.
No, I sold the farm and
Isn't it always?
moved.
Man.
Yeah. But it is.
Man.
They've line washed the walls. I remember Carl telling me. See what I learned from Carl. Like in the old days, they were painted inside. And before it was just sort of stone, and now they've had it rendered and painted, and it looks probably like it was, I don't know, in the 15th century.
Oh, lovely. That's what they've done with Colwinston as well.
Lovely.
Yeah, it's
around the Vale.
lovely, isn't it, to see?
Yes.
But these churches aspire to the way that they used to look, and that's what I would say. You know, it's having to. Well, one of the interesting stories I'll tell you about this is that he's no longer the local reverend, but Reverend Kettle of Colwinston and Llisworney, and when he was a reverend at Llisworney, he decided, instead of paying out a fortune on getting the building whitewashed and the walls pointed, he decided to do it all by himself.
Wow.
So he was known as the abseiling vicar. No, honestly, I'm straight up. His wife was actually telling me, she was saying that he would with a bucket and a grouting tool, he would abseil. He would just do the walls. And the thing is, this is one of the adventures in history and archaeology, to try and get on with it and do it and to conserve it and love these sites, instead of waiting for Big Brother to have his hand in it all.
Yeah,
I think the past is our responsibility, and your responsibility is to tell us how wonderful these things are, as you've just done, Goff, because your sense of appreciation means a hell of a lot to the people who've actually done the work on these sites.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, thanks for that, Goff. I'm going to ask now, is there any news from Adam? Because Adam's just joined us.
Right, well, no news from me.
We a bit of a delay tonight because basically I can't make this excuse up. I was playing with my sheep. Right, we are started. No other news now. We're straight into it. So tonight is a rather interesting one, as all these lectures are, and I've got a nice little bit of a background there as well, coming and going as it does, and I think my camera might need a little bit of a clean there. Hang on a minute. Let's just give it a little bit of a clean. So tonight we're going to be looking at the Barrow diggers, part 4, I do believe it is, and we're going to look at that, and that sort of takes on more sort of more interest as we start to look at more of these Barrow diggers, and it sort of links us in with the sort of Neolithic and Bronze Age landscape. So we also look at Little Meg. So what we're going to do, we're going to share some images straight away now, and it might not be completely lined up. It might have a little bit from this morning's lecture, and I do believe I completely missed out on asking Richard if he's got any news, but Richard, we'll have it in the break. Got God, I feel terrible now. Right, okay. So here we go. We'll look at these images now. Hang on, gallery, and we had this lecture this morning on Barry. So we're just nobody wants to know about Barry. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Little Meg, which will be towards the end. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at the Barrow diggers. Not too many images today, but I think the lecture today is more about getting a feel for what the Barrow diggers are experiencing and their sort of assessment of the landscape. But one thing I would like to mention is a find that's actually come up, because one thing that we used to do in my live classes was we used to have articles of the week, and some weeks we'd have so many articles of the week that we just couldn't read through them all. But this itself is an article of the week that's really, really relevant to what we're doing. And what is relevant is the size of these buildings and the meaning of what we're looking at. Now, jumping quickly, these types of structures weren't really being seen until the Bronze Age, or at least the Iron Age. But the structures you're actually looking at now date to no less than just under 6,500 years. They're in Europe, they're in France. We've got proper structures, really powerful, imposing structures being built in Europe. This is in France, excavated by Cambridge University. Well, that was one of the groups that excavated this site in France. And I don't really give this enough justice because there's an article of the week. However, for me, this is one of the earliest classed as defensive settlement structures in Europe. Now that is a lot for me to sort of try to connect with, because one thing that we're talking about with settlements in the Neolithic period is that, you know, we're thinking little settlements where, you know, when we've got this sort of rich ceremonial landscape, ritual landscape, whatever you want to refer to it as, or as I refer to it as the landscape of the ancestors and the landscape of the dead, right? And a landscape of ceremony. And it's very rare that we actually find the places that these people lived. So this Neolithic site in west central France is thought to be the home of some of the first people to construct these megalithic barrows and dolmens in Europe. Dolmens, another word for chambers, as we would refer to them. They refer to dolmens, burial chambers, tumuluses, or whatever you want to call them. Dolmens are the type of large sort of landscape that we're sort of talking about in regards to the Neolithic period. So this site itself is a place called Le Pou, and Le Pou itself, the Le Pou enclosure, was actually initially found by aerial photography in 2011. It is only now that we're actually excavating this site. And what they've excavated so far is a number of buildings clustered on the top of a small hill, surrounded by a palisade. Now, oh, by the way, who have actually given access to Dell's just come on? So can somebody let Dell on?
It's not coming up on mine.
Right, all right, then I'll have to come off the lecture a minute and let Dell on. Hang on a bit. Right, hang on a minute. Let Dell on. Let him on. Richard, I'll give you a bit of carte blanche a minute. Hang on. Richard, baby. So if Bill comes on, just go. Yeah, you go. We've just let him on anyway, so we've got Dell just join us. Right, so we'll just get straight back to the lecture we're talking about. We're straight into it again. Where are we? Bit of a mess a minute. Hang on, get back to there. There's me. Back to this again. Right. So again, what's important is that we're looking at this structure from above, two separate stages of structure, and this itself is a building. And what we can see here is a reconstruction of this building on stone footings, and you can see this from above. And this is another image of this. And this structure, you've got stone walls, you've got these post holes. it's looking good. And this itself, if we want to go back to what they're saying, this is actually classed as a guarded monumental entrance to a site. And this is, again, the date itself is 6,500 years ago. Soil testing of the area showed that the settlement was also bordered by a protective marsh. So this is a raised area. Around the landscape itself is a protective marsh. They got a palisade. They're really meaning business. So this, for me, is quite an important step. So this is I really haven't assessed this in my mind, to be honest with you. But if I want to make a sort of carte blanche statement, this is like finding the houses of the people who built the pyramids in Egypt. So in other words, we're now finding the homes of the people who built this great landscape that we're looking at. And this, for me, is actually telling us that in a way, what we're seeing is that we're actually starting to see that the people actually lived in nice, impressive structures. And the cards of understanding the past from the Neolithic period are starting to fall and to create a debt so that we can deal with. A little bit more information about this if you want to find this. There's not much more than I'm actually saying on archaeology on the website, but it's actually printed in antiquity. Prehistoric monument builders' homes found in France. Love it. I'm loving that. So that leads us into another love for the Barrow diggers. So
Carl,
what we're going to do, yeah?
The Dell's not coming up on there. If you
He
put it
should have
on
actually,
me, or he
he
hasn't
should
come
have
back.
actually come on. Del, are you there?
He's not showing on my screen. He's not coming up
Del, are you
to let
there?
him in, to enter him.
Oh, God. Hang on a minute. Hang on, just see if he's there. Hang on.
He's there, but he's not there. He's in the group. He's in the chat, but he's not on the.
He's not alive.
He's not with the Woolwich. Oh, he's there. We're looking at a cupboard. Right, okay, back to where we were. The gallery, straight to it. So we're going to look at the south coast now, and we're looking at the Barrow diggers, right? And again, some of you wondering why we're looking at Bronze Age stuff when we're sort of supposed to be looking at Neolithic stuff. But I think this Barrow diggers, we're coming across Neolithic sites as well. And there's some questions that are offered by this text, which I give answers to. And I sort of, I don't know if I'm going to paint it the same way as I did on Tuesday, because I made lots of statements on Tuesday. I've made mistakes in archaeology. I've and it's taught me to be a better archaeologist. Howard Carter made mistakes in archaeology. It taught him to be a better archaeologist. These antiquarians made mistakes in archaeology. Taught them to be better antiquarians, better archaeologists. We've made mistakes, right? So I look at this, and the site that we're going to look at is a site known as a site at Sturminster. So Sturminster itself is a site that we look at, a site known as Shapwick Barrow, and then we look at another site known as Barrow Regis. We look at the Beverell Barrow. So Barrow diggings seems clearly to have gained its impetus within the late 1700s into the 1800s. A few weeks ago we looked at the work of Hoare, okay, we looked at Cunnington, right? Colt Hoare, if you can remember. Cunnington and Colt Hoare worked together, and we're looking at this sort of earlier part of the 1800s. Nobody's mentioned the fact that, you know, the 1800s is a time of war, right? But these people going out looking at the landscape had a bit of time on their hands. They were able to do a bit of digging. So the early 1800s saw the real sort of paraplay of expressions with how we are meant to understand these barrows, and it's a work of that lots more people are digging into these barrows, because people are actually seeing that the barrows are relevant rather than a pastime. But I think they've always been relevant and seen to be part of our historical landscape. And yesterday I started making statements and remarks about modern archaeology, where modern archaeology in many ways is not much better than what these people were doing back in the 1800s and the middle part of the 1700s. So let's use words like maybe digging into mounds like this could be seen as careless, indiscriminate. There's faults, but I go back to the Norfolk and South Wales, St Athan, Landau. We go to Kent. We go to other places where the landscapes associated with the Neolithic and the Bronze Age were flattened due to the war effort. Dig for Britain as well. So the military flattened these sites in 1938, 1939. Dig for Britain, 1940s, 1941. We're flattening the landscape. We're getting rid of these mounds. So you could be critical with the way people were digging these mounds in the 1800s, but we did an absolute arse job with destroying them in living memory, right? So whatever we get from these excavations is better than nothing. This period that we're talking about ushered in the age of the gentlemanly class, whose employees, brackets, close brackets, plundered mounds wholesale in the search for curios to fill their showcases and cabinets. But then again, when we think about this, those cabinets where we get the artifacts shown and then they're still with us, you could think, well, what we did in the 1930s and 1940s destroyed everything. So they probably did a lot better job than what we're seeing in the 1930s and 1940s. For example, one thing I didn't mention yesterday, and I'll share this with you. I went to a nice little museum at Horsham with my little lad, Reuben, when he was out in his little pushchair. And this is in Sussex. And I take my son around this museum in Horsham. We went there a few times. And it was one of those oldie-worldy museums with cabinets of people that had dug the mounds in Sussex. And again, you're talking about cabinets full of curios that had been dug in the 1800s. Nice little museum in Horsham. But if that work hadn't been done, then we may have lost it since. Am I sort of justifying what these antiquarians did? Yeah, of course I am. Why not? Rarely, if ever, were the results of their plunderings recorded, and thus much valuable information was lost to posterity. Do you know what? I excavated a complete medieval village outside Cowbridge. I've got the every single report handwritten from that excavation. I've got every single artifact. I've got the plans. I've got the photographs. I've never published that report either. I'm the only archaeologist to ever work on that site. I got to publish that stuff before I die, because if it's not published, the work that I did in the 1990s will be nothing more and nothing less than the plunderings of these sites that were made in the 1800s. So I've got to publish my work before it's too late. And in many ways, that's why I've stepped back from mainline archaeology, because I thought, right, I've done enough work, I've done enough damage, I need to get out and make that damage positive. So I admit my mistakes, I admit my responsibilities, and I've got to do something about it. By the middle of the 1800s, 1850s, and thus much valuable information was lost to posterity. That's a bold statement. I disagree. By the middle of the at that stage as well, by the 1850s, the authorities were condemning the wholesale desecration wrought on burial mounds in the name of mere treasure hunting. Indiscriminate digging is a subject that we will refer to later on. But you know, I'm going to make one point here, right? And this is going to sound very harsh. Metal detecting is condoned by the authorities. They encourage metal detecting. Go out, dig whatever you like, right? And then give it to us in the museums. We'll put it in little boxes and nobody will see it again. I say that that's the same as this. You know, you could argue that records are kept of people who go metal detecting, but equally 50% of all metal detecting finds are not reported, right? I've been to metal detecting clubs and given lectures, and you hear people say, oh, well, you know, I was digging in the field the other week, I'm not reporting it, right? So it's still going on today, but we go along with it and say it's fine, right? We've not moved on at all. And a metal detecting enthusiast comes in the room now and he says, oh, right, if it wasn't for metal detecting enthusiasts, you wouldn't have most of the knowledge that you've got with archaeological sites. And I say, we don't need that knowledge. We can't cope with the information that we've got. As far as I'm concerned, we've got so much information now in boxes that it's going to take us generations to do. You know, it's, you know, we've got a responsibility now to go into our boxes, into our churches, into our landscape, to understand that what we've got without digging any more holes. For example, in a strange way, the pseudo point was made earlier on by Goff with Wick Church, right? Wick Church is being done up, things are being tidied up, it looks presentable, and it's for public use. Well, if it had been mothballed and allowed to fall apart and nobody loved it anymore, is that right? No, it's not. So in other words, what we've done, we've actually brought these places alive, and this is our responsibility in this age now to stop, look at what we've got before it's too late. Because I tell you what is too late is everything that's been archived on the internet, and no hard copies have been made. You know, I yesterday, for example, some of you have already met Peter C, not Peter S. Adam's met Peter online, and Peter said he was he said in the week to me, he said, oh, I've been doing lots of research on Dartmoor, right? And I said, right, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And he said, oh, I thought you would say that. But then I said, actually, you've misinterpreted what I said. So we talked about this yesterday and was happy. I said, what you need to do, you need to go out, you need to take photographs, you need to take GPS readings, you need to take accurate writings, and you need to print out your photographs, you need to put them in a cardboard box. And if you're not hit by a truck tomorrow, right, your work will not be in vain, right? If you put it on the internet, in about 10 years' time, it'll all be lost. So everything that you've done is in vain. In other words, the internet is actually the same as these people digging in barrows 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, right? Because there's no hard copies being made of what people are finding today. In other words, archaeology today is an absolute joke. We're relying upon systematic records kept on the internet. For example, there was a point made this morning that I made. There was this person that was very upset with the cause of death of their great granddad in the First World War. And somebody was actually writing the letters for writing the information down on the website you know, he's basically been destined to get all the war records online, right? And his family contacted him and said, this is not how our granddad died. Okay, I'll just change the records. What? Yeah, we'll change the records online, but the hard record won't see that, because the hard record is the genuine cause of their great granddad's death. So what we must do is and the other thing as well is, right, everything that I'm telling you about these barrow diggers, right, is actually written down in a book, a photograph printed in a book. These books will be around for the next 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years, but anything printed on the internet will be gone. So what I'm saying is that these people, if they manage to publish anything, that's far better than any of the crap that's printed on the internet today. And I'm saying it. Do you know, I have vowed, right? I'm a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, right? I've got one of their publications in front of me, right? And they said, I think the idea is, if enough people want their yearly publication online, they'll probably stop printing the hard publication, right? I've got the hard publication in front of me. It's brilliant, right? I pay a little extra to have the hard publication, and I will use this hard publication, and I'm looking at the hard publication, and I can understand the hard publication, right, The information on the internet is no good to anyone because it can be doctored, it can be changed, it can be mutated. In a book, it can't be changed except in the case of Roald Dahl's books. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I'm, as you know, I'm an actor, and if somebody said to me, "Oh, read an up-to-date version of William Shakespeare that's had all the wrong stuff taken out," I wouldn't do it. I'm sorry. William Shakespeare is meant to be read the way William Shakespeare wrote it. Roald Dahl is, you're meant to read Roald Dahl as Roald Dahl wrote it. None of this nonsense. So this is all relevant. This is all relevant with what we're doing. This is all relevant with what we're seeing. History and archaeology is not any different from altering records and the way we see the world today, right? It's all relevant. History is relevant. There's lessons to be learned. Those who have got control of history are the ones that dictate our lives. Don't allow them to control history. There were a number, and this is why we do classes like this. Quickly, Anne.
No, I'm just saying that they at university they usually try and get you to get the books,
Yeah.
For your research.
Yes, exactly.
And use library books and things. I don't know. I haven't been I haven't been to college for a long time, but it's usually the lower standards that use like data on the computer. I don't know, is that true, Adam?
Yeah, no, actually I'm going to speak for Adam, and Adam can agree or disagree with me a minute. Adam, I'm going to jump in here a minute. When I was doing my University of Highlands and Islands course, right, you could have done everything via internet records, right? But I couldn't, and none of us did. I actually went out and bought the books because the books had more information than online will ever have online. Tell you what, right? I'm some of you know, or some of you don't know, I'm actually a columnist for the Barrow District News, right? And well, Richard knows this. And the stuff that they print online is different from the stuff that they print in the newspaper, right? And there's a nice photograph in the newspaper. I love having my cuttings, right? Because the stuff online is very different from the stuff in the newspaper, right? And Richard will sort of think, will say, actually, there's more stuff online with my articles in the Barrow District News than actually print in the newspaper. Richard's right. However, the stuff online can be changed. The stuff in the newspaper can't. Adam, respond to what Anne said.
My course, the way they ask the questions in some of the essays and the assignments, it's been accessible for me to get onto online to get the info. However, writing my dissertation, they really don't want me to use secondary sources like academic journals and things I can find online. They want me to deal specifically with primary sources, and to deal with get into the the heavy sort of academic names to do with my argument. Less so to do with stuff I can find online.
But the thing is, right, I'm not lecturing you all and saying I am right, but one thing I do know, and I'm going to tell you this as it is, right? A book. Well, the best example, Mahabharat, the Bible, lots of examples. All this printed stuff, all this stuff handwritten. We still look at hieroglyphs, and the hieroglyphs tell the story, right? Whether it's right or wrong, the hieroglyphs tell the story. The Orkaranka papyruses, which were found in ancient Egypt. We're still looking through all that. We're still wading through all that, right? It's relevant, right? A switch of a button, you can lose all your work that you've ever put on the internet.
Yeah.
It's
But,
you know,
anyway, it's you were always an advocate of books, right from the very beginning, and old books as well.
yes.
The older the
Yeah.
better for archaeology.
And it is the older the better. You know, we as Anne knows and Richard knows, we've been looking at Archeo Cambrensis recently, with Wednesday morning, 11 o'clock. We didn't do it this week, but we've been reading. We've been wading through the Barry book, actually, a proper book, not an online thing, a proper bloody book from 1984.
Mm.
Right. And what I'm doing now is actually referring to a book. I don't have any internet stuff in front of me. I have a bloody book that I'm doing this from, right? And it's so much easier. And the other thing as well is when you do online resources and you're actually reading from online sources, right? Your internet connection can go.
Mm.
So anyway, back to what we were saying. There were a number of excavators enlightened enough to dig for the sake of interest and knowledge in England in the early 1800s, which is very different from the first look when we started today. And their work will, and this work we will see today and we'll see over the next few months. However, most of these early enthusiasts performed in a regrettably casual manner the opening of the Great Barrow in Norfolk in 1808. This is not the Great Barrow in 1808, right? This is an example. This is another Barrow, right? This is actually the wonderful excavations that we will talk about at Shatwick. Anyway, but we'll use this as a background. The one at Norfolk was 12 foot high. This isn't too far off that. 30 yards across, not far off that at all. A hole about 4 yards wide and 2 yards deep were dug into it. Nothing was found until on shoving down the sides to fill up the cavity, a curious urn was discovered, which was cut through the middle with a spade, right? And you're thinking, oh, bloody hell. Oh, God, what's going on here? That's quite shocking. But then again, somebody actually mentions further on here that there's a way of dealing with old artifacts, right? And being able to take them out the ground intact. I'll give you an example of this, right? We're looking at this. Somebody cuts through and they go through the artifact with a spade, right? I'm going to own this one, right? I'm not there in 1808. On an archaeological excavation in 2002, and I do believe that that day Anne's daughter was actually on the excavation. I basically we were working away, and I was teaching everybody how to excavate an archaeological site with a mattock, right? And everyone said, "Oh, we can't excavate an archaeological site with a mattock." And I said, "I can excavate a human skeleton with a mattock. It's how you use your tool. It's a bad workman who blames their tool, right? So you can excavate, right?" Anyway, excavating along, I decided to. There was like a load of loose soil, and you know, and so on. And I think somebody else may have actually joined the class there, Richard. So have a look. And then basically, I was using the mattock, and it smashed through a Neolithic, really intact Neolithic arrowhead, right? And it smashed off the end of this arrowhead, right? Now, I thought, oh bugger, you know, if I'd have worked here in a different way, right, that arrowhead wouldn't be broken. However, the arrowhead was actually in soil that had been ploughed, right? So this is why I was going through the soil with a mattock, right? So no matter what way you look at it, that could have been damaged in any circumstance with a trowel and so on, with a shovel, with anything, right? But regrettably, I damaged that artifact, right? Is that any different from this curious urn, right? A professional archaeologist like me, is that any different from somebody going through an urn with a shovel when they're sort of basically backfilling? No, it's not. We all make mistakes. We all do. And archaeology is not really a precise science. Mistakes are made. I'm owning that one. A sketch of the pot was swiftly made before it was quite destroyed, it being too soft a substance to be taken up in large fragments and just dumped into the soil. Doubtless, the type of excavation had parallels elsewhere, not all committed as this one was to the pages of Archaeologia or kindred journals. So in other words, they actually made a sketch of the artifact. Is that any different from what archaeologists do when they are collaborating with the work on HS2 to basically make a record of the archaeologists it's ripped through by a digger? Is that any different? No, we're making a record. Archaeology is about making records and publishing that record and telling you about that record. I tell you what, right, that image in front of you, that's Shatwick, not this one here, that's Shatwick. And the artifacts we're talking about are these types of artifacts, right? This is far more valuable than losing records on the internet. Do you know what? In the 1980s, right? In the 1980s, we're going to give you 2 points here. Sorry, I'm going off in tangents today, but I'm on a flow. In the 1980s, towards the end of the 1980s, there was an archaeological company who just had a computer, and it was like late 1980s, and they decided to put all their records on the computer. And the archaeological director said, now we've got it all on the computer, right? We can to save space, we'll just get rid of all the records, right? So they got rid of all the records. Somebody pressed the wrong button on the computer and lost all the records. So there was no record of the archaeological excavation at all. Is that any different from this? It's not. Whereas me, I wrote handwritten records and photographs of the excavations I was doing, right? And even when I had the excavation at St. Bride's as well, I haven't published that. However, it's all every single day I was excavating at the site, I did a record, a typed record, and printed it out. And I'm glad I didn't rely upon the computer, because that computer had a fault with it and I lost all the computer records, but I had a hard copy of it printed out. Job done. So you know, we've got to be very careful how we rely upon modern records. Richard knows this as well. Well, I don't think I'm talking about Richard, but there was a chap, Brian Ketch. He was doing a book which Archaeology Company published on the Frolic, which I do believe sank on the 17th of March in the year 1831. And basically, when he was originally doing the work on the Frolic, he referred to all the newspapers from 1831, right? When he went back to those newspapers to check the records, somebody had actually made facsimile copies or photocopies of them and put the images online, right? They weren't as good as the originals. So the information that he was checking, he couldn't even check them, because the information that he had written down from the original newspapers was far better than the information on the copies, because the library chucked all the newspapers in a skip from 1831, you know, and he can't. So in other words, his handwritten record was far better than the internet record that they actually made. How ridiculous is that? An interesting excavation on a barrow at Beedon in Berkshire was carried out in 1815, though not published till the 1850s. That's interesting, right? My excavation, which concluded in 1994 outside Cowbridge, right? If I get to work with that in the next couple of years or so, right? That's not 45 years on from this work at Beedon in Berkshire. Just a little bit over 30 years on, and I've still got all the information, so that's what I'm going to do. Diggers had great difficulty back with this one at Beedon in securing permission to excavate, as the tenant and his wife feared that any opening of the mound would raise the ghosts of those interred there, right? There's nothing different. I know an archaeologist called Professor Colin Richards. He went to work on one of these islands out in the Outer Hebrides. I'm not sure it was Egg or Moll. I don't know which one it was. Anyway, he US probably. And he went out there this one day, and basically they got permission to excavate a burial site, and all the local people come out in accordance to stop them excavating on the site, because they believe them excavating the site would interfere with ghosts and cause them hell. And that's very recently. So these ideas of ghosts and stuff doesn't change. People are still sort of really superstitious, right? I'm the type of archaeologist that has learnt my lessons, right? I excavated a body in Cyprus back in about 1994, and when I excavated this body in Cyprus, I had the body removed, and I was directing the excavation. I was only 19 years old, so I basically said I want all the bones taken out and whatever, right? It turned out to be a soldier that had died in 1974, right? So because he had a bullet cartridge lodged in the back of his skull, right? So we found this, right? Anyway, long story short, I wish I'd left that body in the ground. I wish we'd have excavated it, taken the skull out, taken the bullet cartridge out, put the body back in, identified the body. Could have been left there, but we didn't do that, right? I'm the archaeologist that learned years on, if ever I find human remains, in any circumstance, those human remains are going to remain in the ground with the artifacts that they're found with. This is the things we learn. And in fact, these Barrow diggers were actually doing exactly the same thing. They were making mistakes and they were learning from their mistakes to be better antiquaries, better archaeologists. Back to this, however, the promise that any valuables discovered should be rendered up to them at length secured their permission. The excavation was thus commenced, however, and this is what was said of the excavation, and I do believe the excavator was a chap by the name of John Skinner. I think it's not clear who it was, but we'll just say if this was John Skinner. He goes on to say, the work was much impeded by a violent thunderstorm, which the country people regarded in some manner caused by the sacrilegious undertakings to disturb the dead. One of the labourers employed left the work in consequence, and much alarm prevailed. The opening, in fact, revealed some form of wooden stake circle or allied timber structure, the first ever noticed in British Barrow archaeology, and that would definitely be from the end of the Neolithic period. So in other words, what we're talking about, we're not talking about burials or in the middle of the Neolithic period, maybe in excess of 5,000 years ago. But we're not going to give that a date because we don't have dating evidence. And he goes on to say, a regular horizontal layer of charred wood appeared, placed on a stratum of red clay. The old ground surface, I may add. The workmen found several perpendicular holes formed almost in a circle around the centre of the barrow. They were about a foot in depth and 2 inches in diameter and were partly filled with charred wood. Tell you what, that's the type of thing you get in the bloody Times newspaper describing a new archaeological site today. And this was a site that was excavated in 1815. And there's a lot of information there. And if that was all the information that we get, then that is really interesting, that we've got some information, and it's gone down to the ages as well. Tell you what, nothing was recorded on those hundreds of barrows that were flattened at RAF St. Athan and Landau in 1938 and 1939 by my granddad. Because Noah, my granddad, love him to bits. He was one of the digger drivers who did that at RAF St. Athan and Landau. But it was just on Ministry of Defence that they needed to do that, and that's exactly what happened. They just went through these things with bulldozers, flattened them, and they built an airfield. However, this is a really important point. The archaeology is still there. All you've got to do is find out where these barrows were, excavate the barrows, reconstruct the barrows and the data there. If you do it properly, you can reconstruct what the landscape looked like. And I'm going to bring in that Nicola Bulley case a few weeks ago. It's that issue that you could reconstruct forensically the landscape 3 weeks on from whatever events happened, right? Moving away from that, forensic archaeology can work thousands of years back in time. This is how important archaeology is. And in fact, in many ways, understanding everything and all these minutia, we can blame people for destroying archaeology, but we can also see whatever records that they gave us are very important today, because we just mentioned it, that's a record. That's far more important than somebody putting a full excavation record on the internet and pressing a button and you've lost it. Despite its early date, this barrow opening appears to have been conducted by an enlightened group of antiquarians who were interested in what they were doing. We know that there's charred wood. We know that there's a circle. We know that there's a wooden structure of some kind. Great, love it. So what we need to do is we need to look at an archaeologist who was a right nana, and then he turned out to be somebody who turned into somebody who knew sort of what he was doing. And we're going to read the text. I had to say that before I read the text because I'm thinking this guy was a right nana, and then he turned out okay. So let's just see it. One of the much when you think about it, again, this is quite a technical look at sharp work. Okay, and you know this is a good excavation here in front of you, but this is, if we go back to John Skinner, a place he excavated elsewhere, one of the much maligned diggers of the early 1800s was Reverend John Skinner, 1772, 1839, a friend of Cold Hall that we did a few weeks ago. He opened some 26 barrows in Somerset between 1815 and 1818 around his Camerton parish. You can somebody asked the question yesterday. They said, Carl, how did these people get permission to do all this digging? Well, he didn't need permission. It was his bloody parish, for God's sake. He wrote up the details of his perambulations, love it, and researches in England and elsewhere in 98 manuscript volumes, profusely illustrated with watercolor drawings. My God, this guy's a true saint, is he? 98 manuscripts, love it. These were bequeathed to the British Museum on condition that they were not open for 50 years. These records, his perambulatory researches throughout Britain, and replete with agonizing details of the shortcomings of his delvings, with references to pickaxed urns broken by clumsy and often unsupervised workmen, and sites trampled by the hooves of flocks of straying sheep. But he recorded that things were found. That's key. And also, I've been working on archaeological sites, and you get a bloody flock of seagulls wandering across a place with droppings, and you get. By the way, that was a quote from the band from the 1980s. I had to put that in there. Wishing. You might get a load of cattle and cows and sheep wandering across the site. It happens, right? It happens today. Fair enough. I can imagine now when we start excavating down here on the site that we've got here, we'll have my little sheep looking down on us, you know. John Skinner was a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, while I'm a fellow of the Scottish Society of Antiquaries, and was interested in etymology as well as archaeology. I would say I'm interested in lots of other things as well as archaeology. As an archaeologist, his work was painfully crude, even by the low standards then obtaining. But were they? On one single afternoon, for instance, he or rather his labourers, dug into no less than 6 barrows. Well, lots of the other archaeologists, Cunnington and Hoare, did the same thing. We don't talk negatively of them. He described in casual fashion that nothing was found since his men missed the centre or did not dig deep enough. Do you know what? Bloody hell. I love it. Do you know when I'm Goff knows about this. Goff kindly gave my name to a resident of Lisworney, and I undertook an archaeological watch and brief. And basically, I was hoping that I wasn't going to find anything, and I didn't. Simply because I didn't want to find anything. For me, as an archaeologist, it's a nightmare to find things because you've got to publish the results. This guy wanted to find stuff, and he was disappointed that he didn't find anything. Lucky for him. On another occasion, he remarked that 4 barrows were dug without result. Thank goodness for that. But the labourers did their work so badly that they may have digged wide of the kists, as he was not on the spot to direct them, and could not rectify his mistake except by working the ground all over again. Oh, well, lucky for you. And in fact, lucky for the archaeology. So if he didn't find it, then it's there for somebody else to excavate. I'm fine with this. In 1816, our friend John Skinner, acting on behalf of Cold Hall, dug into the chambered long barrow at Stony Littleton. In his account of the excavation, Cold Hall describes that under Skinner's judicious and able guidance, an opening was made in the roof. In other words, one of the finest examples of a transept gallery grave in Britain was entered via a gap forced between two of the capstones. John Skinner afterwards remarked that the mound was never properly examined until I had done it. Well, flippin' heck, you know, we've got some record of this thing, for God's sake. You know, we've got some information. Love it. What's wrong with this? And by the standards of the day, they don't have cameras, they don't have geophysics, they don't have thermoluminescence data, and they don't have potassium iodine data, and they don't have radiocarbon data. So I don't have to go on. But we've got some information. We're reading it to you now. What's wrong with us? An amusing and rather sad little story about John Skinner concern. Now, I'm going to I link in with this story, right? And I tell you, I'm going to read this out, and I'm going to link in with the story, right? John Skinner concerned some amber beads found by him with a cremation in a group of tumuli called the Priddy Nine Barrows. So we understand that must be in Somerset. The beads were of a rich ruby colour, and to his pleasure, John Skinner found that one of them contained a bee which had been trapped in the resin when it was still fluid. So we could probably date that to maybe the Cretaceous period, maybe, you know, it's a geological find, or more recent in time. One day he was showing this prize of his collection to a Mrs. Raisbeck when the unfortunate lady let it slip from her fingers. It fell onto an iron chest and shattered. John Skinner was most upset, although he did his best not to show it. But poor Mrs. Raisbeck was inconsolable, as the object was, as she put it, irreplaceable. We're going to look at these points in a minute, the language of this. When she left the parsonage, she was still distraught. John Skinner gallantly attempted to ease her feelings by dashing off a few lines of verse on the subject and sending them to her by messenger. Unfortunately, she did not receive them. This was a pity, since they possessed some little charm and are worth repeating. John Skinner titled it the poem, Lines written on the escape of a bee from his imprisonment of 2,000 years to a fair lady who was the fortunate cause of the emancipation, January the 24th, 1826. Now, I can relate to this. Anyone who's actually bought copies of my book, Romans in South Wales, or Romans in the Vale of Glamorgan, whatever version, right? They will see reference of blue beads, right? It's my little William Burgess parrot type thing, right? You'll find blue beads, right? Anything with any site with blue beads, it's mentioned, and I discuss blue beads, right? Years ago, a relative of mine went to Cyprus and brought back a forbidden artifact, right? And that forbidden artifact was a blue bead, a Roman blue bead, with some kind of attachment still associated with it. I was over the moon with this blue bead. It was probably Palestinian Roman blue glass bead, right? It's as close as that, and basically it was intact. And I thought, oh, this is a really nice find. So I took it to a meeting. It happened to be of the Barry Museum Association that we'd just recently set up, and this was in 1989, and it was at the Barry Leisure Centre. And who should be giving a talk for us was Gerald Baudet. So anyway, we at the end of the lecture, I brought this blue bead out and I showed it around the room. Stupidly enough, as I was saying goodbye to Gerald Baudet, somebody left this bead on the table, right? And I didn't know that somebody else was putting the tables away. As they put the table away, this blue bead flicked up into the air, went down the back of a radiator, right, and was never ever seen again. I was absolutely distraught, right? So one day when the Barry Leisure Centre is being demolished, they will find a Roman blue bead and know that the Romans were there. These things happen. These things do happen. They do happen. And this is the poem And what we will do probably in a couple of minutes is take a little bit of a break, but we'll do a little bit more before we have a little bit of a break. This is that poem, right? And the poem again, lines written on the escape of a bee. Here we go. Escaped at length, our druid's bee fulfills his mystic destiny, which dooms whatever is to be. How sweet his freedom, we suppose, when his deliverer is a rose. With looks so sweet and bloom so fair, oh, like this bee, be mine the doom, that angels greet me from the tomb. Then my imprisonment will seem, though thrice his time a moment's dream. And I tell you what, that's like Shelley. That's exactly Shelley, not Coleridge, Shelley. It's almost as if that came from Shelley. This is the type of writing about the time. I'm loving that because it brought me to the work of Shelley. But that is our John Skinner. Gosh, exactly. Look at that there. Look, if that hadn't, we're gonna tell you about this in a short while if we get to it. That is actually from Grinsthorpe near Scarborough, and it's still there today. Right, back to this mound. Sorry, we don't have many images, and I know Gough likes his images, but Gough also likes my voice. Gough is probably just closing his eyes now, just thinking, I don't really care what the images look like. He's done an hour of that before. Skinner's end was unfortunate. In 1839, in the 67th year of his life, he shot himself in a wood after a quarrel with his sons and daughter.
Oh,
Bugger. He sounds like a really interesting bloke, and he actually cared as well. He really gives me the sense that he actually cared. He screwed things up, but he actually cared. During the period from 1826 to 1845, 3 small privately printed literary works appeared, dealing with aspects of Barrows and Barrow digging. One of them, Barrow Diggings by a Barrow Knight, 1845, deals with a certain Bateman. We're not doing Bateman today. We'll come on to Bateman in a few weeks. Operations, and will be described again. The other were the Deverell Barrow, 1826, and the Barrow Diggers of 1839. 1839 is actually the year that Catherwood is going to go and have a look at the site of Palenque in Central America. The former was written by William August Miles in commemoration of the opening of a barrow the previous year. Miles, remember that name, Miles, 1839. He comments precisely in the text that, in the absence of history, the spade is no mean historian. The work is a rather dramatized account and describes the findings of numerous urn cremations in the mound in question. Not surprisingly, in view of the antiquarian climate of the day, the author emerges as an incipient druidophile, with his references to the soothsayers as they mark the trickling course of human blood, invoked in all their wild and imposing gore-drenched ceremonies, the vengeance of the gods upon their foes, and through the war exciting the despotic druids. In one purple passage, the author pictures the scene of the work as evening closed in on the Dorset downland. Now, we mentioned that because we're going to read out this, right? It sounds like nonsense at the beginning. Then there's a point to be made after this. And then, after we've made the point, we will take a break. So sit back, listen to the end, right? So this takes a few minutes. This is our friend William Augustus Miles. In some cases, when night was stealing on and an urn had been partially discovered in order to ensure its preservation, I have bivouacked round the fire with my labourers till near midnight. No pleasant situation on a bleak and elevated Dorset down on a November night. Men were employed in dragging furs from an adjoining spot, and it was a fine subject for the talent of an artist to have described the venerable urn smoking at the flame. You'll understand what that means in a short while. They actually smoked the urns. Now, don't think anymore. While a red and flickering gleam played upon the countenances of the labourers, who, speaking in low and subdued tones, and having their eyes fixed upon the flames and dead men's bones, were afraid to look into the surrounding darkness. The swell of the passing breeze, as it fanned the fire, raised them from their reverie, or roused their attention from some fearful story of the goblin damned. Goblin Stone, Merthyr Mawr, love it, but this is not Merthyr Mawr, which was gravely related and as faithful believed. The effect produced by the narrative of the village thatcher added most strongly to the horror of their situation, as he gravely declared that his father and elder brother had been most cruelly dragged about and beaten by some invisible hand on the very down on which we stood. There was no danger of a deserter from my party, as fear kept them together, and our group was augmented by the curiosity of the passing peasants, who, deviating from their homeward course, wondered why a fire blazed on the unfrequented down, a spot which it is more than probable no fire had gleamed since the last deposit. We're talking about the deposition in the mound. Was purposely and religiously placed in the Barrow just explored, save at the Mave rites. Just talking about maybe people went back there and revered this site. We're getting it. Carrying on. But now, how changed the scene, the urn when it was last seen by man, so hallowed, so venerated, the form, the featured of the chief whose ashes it contained, fresh to the minds and perhaps dear to the memories of those who assisted at the sepulchre ceremonies. Now, after the lapse of many hundred years, calmly reeked before a burning faggot to the rude gaze of an astonishing peasant. Now, why have I mentioned that? Why have I even mentioned that? The reason is there's imagination. And that's what history and archaeology is about. We've got to imagine what the past was like. We've got to connect the past with the present. That's what they're doing. We've got a fire today. That's what they had in the past. The peasants looking on. Maybe there were peasants looking back on in the past. People are scared. People are curious about the legends and myths about the landscape. It's all there. Opening your minds, a fresh mind, looking at the sepulchre of the dead. We're opening something that was last seen many years ago. You know, all of this imposing information, and this is what bringing history and archaeology is about. And urn smoking at the flame, what the hell does that mean? Well, actually, this is a very curious thing. We'll come on to what this means in detail in a moment, but basically, when you've excavated a very friable urn that's going to fall apart any minute because it's damp, you put it alongside the fire. The fire dries out the urn, gives it a little bit more substance, and the artifact is going to keep together for many, many years.
Mm.
And why don't we do that today in modern day archaeology? It's a very good thing to do. We excavate so many things out of the ground and they just fall apart. You know, we get iron artifacts. For example, when I get iron artifacts out of the ground, I take them straight home. I put them in the oven or on a fire. You take them off while they're still boiling hot, right? And then you varnish them. The varnish keeps everything together, right? And you've got an artifact that's going to last a lot longer. I wanted to mention something else before we have a break. And by the way, it's very unlikely that we're going to do Little Meg tonight. But as I say, I wanted a little break just to sort of refresh my. But one thing I would say is that in ancient Egypt, if you can imagine pots like this in ancient Egypt, this is from our landscape, but they would be slightly different from ancient Egypt. But what they're doing in ancient Egypt now is when they're excavating pottery, which is broken, they glue in the artifacts together whilst they're excavating them. So when they take them out of the ground, they're whole. And that is a brilliant technique. And why? Well, as Richard knows, when you get an artifact that's all over the place, right, and you've got to put it together over months and years, right, Uh, it's a very tiresome thing to do. But if you've got pots, and you've dried out the site a little bit, glue the pots together as you're taking it out the ground. So therefore, nobody has to do the work of trying to put a pot together after the excavation. I think that's a brilliant technique. It really, really is. Ancient Egypt. And in many ways, this is what we're talking about with these artifacts. What we're going to do, I think the best thing tonight is to save a little bit of time, is we'll do questions at the end, right, instead of twice. So put any questions, mark them down. We're going to have a very, very quick break now. And we're basically, all I want is just to have, all I want to do is I just want to just get a drink, and that's how quick we're going to be, right? So if anyone wants to have a quick jar, they can, right? But we're going to be quick. Adam, tell them about the little people under your bed.
Oh dear.
I saw 3 ships come sailing in, come sailing in, come sailing in. I saw 3 ships come sailing in on Christmas Day in the morning.
Yeah, Dell is there, but we haven't seen him. Dell, hello, hello. Oh, did you enjoy your holiday?
Yeah, I did. Fascinated by the goats.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was on the telly a while back. They were saying they were having awful trouble with them.
Oh,
They
definitely,
had to
yes.
cull them or something.
Definitely, especially the night before bin day. They
Oh,
seem to know when they all come down.
oh,
Are you talking about goats?
yeah.
Yes.
On
Where are these goats?
no, the Great Orme.
Oh, yeah.
They
Well,
come down into town.
Yeah,
Oh,
we were up there last week, Carl, and yeah, absolutely fascinating. We couldn't go up to see the copper mines and stuff because they closed it. They're doing something with the roads. I don't know, filling potholes probably.
Oh, yeah.
One bucket at a time, as they do. Yeah, just fascinated by these goats. They're vicious.
Are they?
Well, they look vicious.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I suppose they're
well,
big.
They are big.
Yeah.
well, we've got to get a nanny goat to sort our 2 boys out.
Thought you had
They've got-
one.
No, they're 2 billies.
Oh,
You got 2 billies?
I got 2 billies. We need a nanny goat because our 2 billies are getting a bit lazy and they're just
Oh,
yeah. So the nanny will basically because they've been docked anyway, they're not going to do anything to it anyway. We're going to get a nanny, right? And she will basically get them to look around the field. So basically, the nanny's job is to get them foraging, right? And also the nanny will get them out. We're basically in Old Welsh, there's something called the ysbyty mice, which is the hospital field. And if the goats are not brilliant at this minute, and the nanny will get them up and say, look, you've got to eat those flowers and you've got to do this. At the same time, we're going to get a ram man. We're going to get a ram, a Shetland ram, and we're going to get another sheep. So we'll have altogether 8 sheep. And before Goth turns around and says, I'm not doing these classes to listen to you going on about your sheep every week. Sorry, Goth. Right. So what we've got to do, we've got to get back to the screen, right?
oh, it's because there's not enough room to share Dell.
What do you mean to share, Del?
what do you want to share me for?
I can't see
Del,
you.
I think
we
she's
didn't
trying
know
to get
you
you into
were there.
prostitution.
Oh,
Right. Anyway, crack on, folks.
Pat tried, which is why we don't see her anymore.
Pat.
Tried.
Tried to do what?
Get me into prostitution.
Oh,
Oh, right. I got to be honest with you, Dal. We got to crack on with this lecture, but I would say being a call, I've been an escort, right, and the type of people that you've got to meet, yeah. Anyway, Cole Hoare, basically wrote that down about our friend John Skinner. He wrote that in his book, right? He wrote that as an introduction to the work of John Skinner. He felt the Barrow had been raised for a family deposit. It's said about the former site that we've just mentioned, 2 large stones in the Barrow were, in his opinion, altars. Interesting. He also thought that the mound must have been frequently reopened to receive further burial deposits, which is rather interesting. And that's rather interesting because it almost tells us that they're going further. You've got a mound, it's left for a couple of years, then more internments are associated with it, sort of little holes dug into the ground, another urn or whatever, right? So these type of sites are very, very powerful, in that we're starting to learn lots more about them in this period in the 1850s and so on. The burial mound that we refer to itself was opened by a section 6 foot wide from near the extreme edge, making a passage to the center. Something like this, not this one, but something like this. Distressed by the comeliness of his labours, which resulted in the smashing of some of the incised urns, Miles worked out a system in his subsequent proceedings to avoid similar accidents. So in other words, after breaking a few artifacts, he had worked out a way to so the artifacts would be no longer broken, right? And we can all hold the cross of that. Basically, years ago, at this site that I've mentioned outside Cowbridge, there was a wall that I was excavating. I didn't know it was a wall. It was a rubble wall, really badly put together. We ended up removing the wall, and then it turned out that the wall was directly based upon these absolutely massive boulders. So it was a boundary wall. So I made the mistake that we moved that, but we got a record of it anyway. So we all make mistakes. Going back to Miles, his eventual method was to remove the bed of native chalk till it was parallel with the kist. Then by striking a passage through, then they were enabled to extract the urn without displacing the stones, which for many years had remained undisturbed. So now we're starting to think about removing the artifact without causing any damage to the artifact and trying to study the surroundings. And this is in the 1800s. This is this is in the 1800s. This is obviously published in 1839. So incidentally, the fires blazing around the Barrow were to evaporate the moisture from the pottery. And that is, in many ways, it almost looks like there's a fire behind this Barrow as well, rather than a cloud. I'm not sure that that's what that is. I think that's a cloud. But so interesting enough, what they're doing in the summer when they're excavating these things, they've got a fire around it as well. So that operates that evaporates the moisture from the air. Is great. Many of the kists and their contents were damp and had to be dried out before the urns could safely be removed. What a great technique. Today, this famous barrow still exists, tree covered and surrounded by a wall of flint. So in other words, because they just cut through a trench through it, the rest of the mound was saved. The other work, also featuring digging in Dorset, was written anonymously by I don't know if you can write anonymously, by Reverend Charles Wool, so you got the name, to mark the exceedingly agreeable opening of Shapwick Barrow in the parish of Sturminster Marshall. That's exactly what we're looking at. The text imitates the dialogue between Hamlet and the gravedigger in Shakespeare tragedy. Love it. The book's importance lies in the profuse explanatory notes, which contain much useful information regarding Dorset antiquities. The notes were written, and so many of them. And we'll just do a few quotes from that. This is Wolves. We got to do a different accent for this. So I chose my prior accent with a desire of recalling to the remembrance of Barrow diggers the principal characteristics of their subterranean pursuits, and directing the attention of the curious inquirer to almost the only source from hence the information can be derived of the manners and customs of the early inhabitants of Britain. The text of the diggers illustrates the ideas and methods of the openers, voiced in the song of the first Barrow digger. There's a Barrow digger song. Here we go. I did this yesterday. I'm just going to do it. Clasps, celts, and arrowheads, I'll try to claw within my clutch. And if a shield I should espy, I'll vow there never was such, with popish tricks and relics rare. The priests their flocks do gull in casting out the earth. Take care. Huzzah! Huzzah! I found a skull. Anyway, that's a Barrow Diggers song, right? It sounds nothing like Sharp. Put 40 shillings on the drum for all those that volunteer to come. Same type of thing. It's nothing like that, but we are archaeologists. None of us can sing. Primitive advice, and I'm loving that. And there's something in that. Popish tricks. So in other words, I'm loving that, because we're almost saying that these things are older than, Catholicism. They're old. Right? We don't really believe this Bible stuff anymore. These things are old. This is what I'm saying with that line. Here we go. Primitive advice on digging equipment specified in that work that a mattock, shovel, and a spade will dig up human bones. And you know what? That's not primitive. You could dig up human remains with a mattock, shovel, and spade if you know how to use a mattock, shovel, and spade properly. You're horrified, aren't you? Me digging up a set of human remains using a mattock, but I've done it. It can be done, and you can get, and then you go in with a trowel. Wall's notes explained how barrows should be opened according to the methods then appertaining. He states that. So we're gonna read this one out, and just trying to work out, make sure that I got enough room to do this today. So here we go. Here we go. The way to open a barrow is either to remove the mound of earth entirely, or to make a section through it at least 6 or 8 feet wide from north to south, or from east to west, or sink a shaft down the center from top to bottom. So Richard Cole Orr invariably adhered to the latter mode with a desire not to injure the external form. The greatest caution should be used in removing the earth, especially when charcoal and fragments of pottery appear intermingled with it. For it not unfrequently happens that relics or ornaments are found near the surface or around the outside of a barrow. Let's do a bit of interjection here. That's really interesting. Charcoal and pottery mixed together. Are they using a sieve? That would be very interesting. And in fact, anyone who's ever excavated with me on an archaeological site will know that every single piece of dirt is sieved or floated, right? Lots of archaeologists don't do that, and they miss things. I've been on archaeological sites after other people have dug, and you find tons of Roman pottery on a mound and with bits of coins. I went to an excavation at Shepton Mallet this one time, and they just excavated a Roman villa. And on this Roman villa, on the mound, there were bucket loads of pottery on this mound that students had missed. It was full of Roman coins that the students had missed. And you're thinking, well, Christ, these are people in the period of the antiquaries recording everything. And people in the 1990s are not recording everything. It goes to show, doesn't it? With respect to the deposits, Mr. Cunnington first discovered and established contrary. Oh, hang on a minute. Let's get back into that. I went off on one. Right, here we go. With respect to the deposits, Mr. Cunnington first discovered and established, contrary to the theory of Dr. Stuteley, that the primary interment is always on the floor of a barrow or in a kist dug in the chalk beneath it. When a wall of heaped flints closely arranged together present themselves, they should be removed with the hand, because a pickaxe, crowbar, or spade at such a crisis has often destroyed an urn by making an eruption into the kist. On arriving at the kist, the operation should be conducted slowly around its edge, either with a trowel or a knife. Want of success at first should never determine abandoning a barrow until it has been thoroughly examined. So in other words, what we're saying is that we now got to a stage that there's going to be something there. You've got to use techniques that try to find the artifacts and leave the rest of the site intact. The other thing as well is we're using a trowel. Is it a 4-inch trowel they're using or a 6-inch trowel? We use 4-inch trowels in modern day archaeology. A brilliant. I've got loads of trowels here. They're brilliant for gardening. One of the plates in his book shows the barrow during the course of the excavation, as presented in front of you now. The barrow, standing 10 foot on a level plane, was penetrated by a roughly hewn gash, 8 foot wide, driven 46 foot through the center to the other side. A shaft was then sunk below the old ground surface in the center. Its floor reached via a ladder. You can see the ladder there. So in other words, they realized instead of digging the rest of the mound, that the artifact is there. So they dig down to it. And you're talking about a little bit like the Duke of, not the Duke of Marlborough, the one who excavated Silbury Hill. Oh God, in the 1870s. What's that?
Cardigan?
I don't know, the Duke of something. Anyway, he excavated a very deep hole into Silbury Hill, right? But what we're doing, we're digging a hole into a shallow hole into the mound, sort of getting an idea. So we've already dug a cross section through it. We know that there is going to be something. So this is what's going on. This shaft was abandoned when the water table was encountered. The whole undertaking lasted 8 days, then a considerable period of time for such an operation. So they may not have found anything, but they actually wanted to continue to actually get an idea. And the other thing as well is 8-day excavation, when most people were digging 2 or 3 mounds in a day. During the same decade, a William Crawford Williamson from 1816 to 1895 published a pamphlet entitled Description of the Tumulus, opened at Grimsthorpe near Scarborough in 1834. Now, was the mound at Scarborough like this? It doesn't really bother me, because what we've got is this. This is still with us today. And I'll repeat, this is at the Grimsthorpe mound at Scarborough, dating from 1834. And I know somebody who's actually seen this, and they say it looks exactly like that. Well, obviously some changes, but it's still on display. The history. Oh, right. Okay. The author, a precocious young man of 17, later achieved eminence as professor of natural history at Manchester University, and could be said to be one of the founders of paleobotany, or I would say the founders of bloody modern day archaeology. But it's a name that you don't really hear about, William Crawford Williamson. And he gave us this. Look at that. You know, this is our Tutankhamun. Right? None of us have heard of it. The barrow contained a skeleton laid in a lidded oak trunk coffin, which owed its preservation to the water-holding nature of the boulder clay of Grimsthorpe Cliff. The body had been wrapped in animal skin, and the bones stained ebony by the tannin acid in the oak. So in other words, it was perfectly preserved. It's still with us today, thousands of years old. Love it. Right. So are we going to have a go at these antiquarians anymore? Are we going to say that they were all bad eggs? No, we're not. We're really, really not. You know, we've got some great archaeologists from Cornwall excavating at Brixham Cave. We've got other archaeologists like Colt Hall. We've got this guy, William Crawford Williamson, and we're starting to see that in many ways archaeology hasn't moved on from this. It really hasn't. In association were a flint javelin, 2 flint arrowheads, a bronze or copper jar with a bone pommel, a bone pin, and a wicker work basket, all carefully illustrated in the published account. A published account, and the remains in front of us. Carrying on. A quantity of vegetable substances was also found within the coffin. What? Start again. A quantity of vegetable substances was also found within the coffin, originally described as the remains of mistletoe. In the oft-repeated phrase, the time, in the oft-repeated phrase of the time, they soon crumbled into dust. Well, Andronicus excavating Vigina in 1956. He said that when he opened the tomb of Philip II, the flowers were still erect in the vases in the tomb of Philip II, and they soon crumbled into dust. It's going to happen, for God's sake, you know. But I'm going to make the point. I'm going to make the point. How did they manage to preserve the bones? We'll do that in a minute. I'm going to make the very, very intriguing point that if this hadn't been found when it had, it would no longer be there today. Scarborough, you've got lots of activity in Scarborough. You've got military activity. You've got building activity. This may have been sort of not found. It would have decayed in the ground. So it was great that it was found back then. Let's not be any more critical. They found it. You can be critical of my work. You can be critical of any work that an archaeologist has done. It's of the age. It's of the moment. The rather decayed bones of the skeleton were stabilized in an early example of conservation by being boiled in gelatine. Wow! You know what I was talking about when you get a bit of iron out in the ground, you wash it and you sort of put it in the oven, you dry it out, you put varnish on. Well, they're using gelatine with the bones. This early Yorkshire man, together with his coffin and relics, is still one of the sites of the Rotunda Museum in Scarborough. In fact, the dig itself taught an important lesson, not appreciated until that time, that it was possible to construct a detailed picture of early man in favourable circumstances by careful consideration of the material survivals. The actual ribs were really like that, right? Okay, they obviously, you know, the body's been put on a shelf and it was a bit disarticulated, but the ribs were in a really good state of preservation. A big guy, and I do believe I'm looking there and I'm thinking, how do you get that body in there? But I do believe from one account that the individual was up to 7 feet tall. Don't know. I can't quote that. Now, the next thing that we do, right, is that we hopefully we can finish this today. So we're going to go a little bit over, guys. I know we finished by 9, but we're going to go 10 minutes over, then we could call it a day. Please bear with me. The growing interest in archaeology reflected in the founding in 1843 of the British Archaeological Association for the encouragement and prosecution of researches into the arts and monuments of the early Middle Ages. In other words, the period of the Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, but it soon became the British Archaeological Association that, you know, does everything to do in archaeology. If you want to join the British Archaeological Association, it's done via a system of blackballing. If you've got one black ball, you're not allowed in, right? It's a bit like the Society of Antiquaries as well. I wasn't blackballed as well. Wicked. It's 1,200 members. Back then, comprised a wide cross section of early Victorian society, and the association inaugurated a series of summer meetings. I'm talking about meetings of minds. Do you know the next Indiana Jones film is very, very soon? And I'm looking forward to seeing it. And do you know what, Adam, we'll invite you down and everybody else, and we'll go and see Indiana Jones in a cinema. It's got to be done. That you could sleep with a sheep, Adam. The association inaugurated a series of summer meetings, and there was a meeting in 1844, and that's an image from it, obviously, a sketch, right? A copper plate. The first being the celebrated Canterbury Congress of 1844, their first, and the earliest archaeological conference on record. And I tell you what, your first archaeological conference of any organization is brilliant, and it's downhill from there. The first conference of Archaeology Cymru was in Bilthwells in 1996, and it was a wonderful thing. We were in a pub in Bilthwells, and it was really, really good. So inaugural meetings of organizations are wonderful, and this one was no exception. The Congress included such diverse entertainment as tours through the cathedral, a display of the municipal archives and archaeological objects, including Fawcett's great collection of Saxon antiquities, which is Fawcett's work back in the southeast, in Kent, and the guess what, right? An inaugural meeting, nobody can beat this, the unwrapping of an Egyptian mummy. Have anyone ever been to an inaugural meeting of any organization that opened an Egyptian mummy? No. And the opening of certain Saxon barrows at Breach Down. This is they're opening barrows on Breach Down. This is Breach Down, September 1844. Listen to this. The opening, they interesting enough, what they did, they had already done the work and they had leveled it so that they could get somebody in there digging away and they could say, look what we found. They'd already done the work, right? But they wanted 8 of these to be dug in one day for the group, for all their guests. There was 200 of them, right? But they'd already been dug. They already knew what was there, a bit like Howard Carter and Tutankhamun. He'd already knew it was there before he saw Lord Carnarvon. There you go. Basically, I'm going to mention that another site where I worked in Shepton Mallet for Nancy and Charles Hollinrake. I was working down there with them for a very short time, and they said to me, they said this was going to be a time team excavation. What was going to happen? We were going to find stuff for time team, and then we're going to fill them back over, and time team was going to find them. There wasn't enough on site, but it was a really intriguing, impressive site. They didn't do it. But basically, this is they time team back, by the way, which is great. So in other words, we've been doing this in archaeology for years. We find something and then we make the great reveal that it's just been found. It's not really how it works. So these openings in one day were supervised by Lord Albert Cunningham, afterwards by Lord Londesborough. The work was witnessed by some 200 guests who flocked to the Downs in a procession of private carriages and hired vehicles. You can see 200 people there, can't you? They're all hidden behind the umbrellas and behind the windmill. Labourers had already lowered the mounds to within 2 feet of the presumed position of the burials, and his lordship, dressed in an exploring costume, merely superintended the uncovering of the skeletons. The operations were constantly interrupted by drenching downpours necessitated by the frequent use of umbrellas. Bloody hell, it's haunted, it's the rain. The fair sex were well represented among the gatherings, and this is really interesting for me, actually, and we're going to mention this in a minute. The local press noting that ladies crowded round the tumuli and almost passionately expressed their gratification as beads and the wire on which they were strung, or amulets, or rings, or armlets, was handed to them for inspection. Women start to come into archaeology big time. However, it's not until Christian McLagan tries to get into the Society of Scottish Antiquaries in the 1880s that women are slowly sort of entered into the fellowships of the Society of Antiquaries and Scottish Society of Antiquaries and the British Archaeological Association. But women are very much there. In fact, it's probably the women who are telling the men, you know, look at that. And they're going, oh, for God's sake, I'm falling asleep. You can look at that one, look at that man there. The woman's nagging him. We've got to stay, we've got to say, we've got to see what's there. Likewise, the juvenile peasantry showed their great curiosity in the proceedings, as eagerly pouring after relics as any archaeologist present. The Reverend Stephen Isaacson, later responsible for the poetic dissertation on Bateman's opening parties, was present at Canterbury, and he scribbled some verses describing the activities during the excavations. And actually, guys, we're near the end, so keep with me. So here we go. Yeah, this is a song. It's almost as if this is another sonnet, isn't it? You could have the verb doing the background to this. This is the scud that took place in the mud. While we sat and looked on from the carriage, such a dash was not seen, such a splash has not been, Mr. Dear Bob, since the day of my marriage. This sounds a bit like Burns, doesn't it? Fine ladies so soiled as onward they toiled, while professors so grave grubbed away, would have made you declare, had you only been there, it was 10 times as good as a play. Such dragging of skirts, such giggling of flirts, as you see in a storm on Hyde Park, with no end of umbrellas to settle the fellows who seem bent on digging till dark. Sir William Bentham, of course, too, was with them. It's nothing without Ulster King. How he handled the thigh bones and other queer dry bones, sometimes shouting out, no such thing. Then chuckles over buckles, as down on their knuckles they picked up little old bits of brass. The clown standing round asking what they had found, if coins, and they thought they would pass. Now, that itself gives you sort of an overview of this whole thing, right? And we spoil the lecture today by mentioning Reverend Buckland. If anyone knows my complete disdain for Reverend Buckland and the Gower, during the Breachdown diggings, Professor Buckland attempted to trick Lord Conningham's servant, Charles, who was working in one of the barrows. Now, this is Reverend Buckland, the guy who supposedly didn't fake Our Lady of the Gower. Oh, Gower. I can't say the Gower, can I? It's Gower. He pulled a ring off his finger and pushed it into the ground. This is Buckland now, close to where Charles, the servant of Cunningham, was carefully scraping, fossicking. Charles eventually uncovered the ring and, after a cursory glance, flicked it onto the soil heap with his trowel point. "What's that?" said the professor. "Oh, 'twon't do for me," was the reply from Charles. "Well, but it's a ring I've picked up." "Yes," Charles said, "but you put it there first." Evidently, Charles was not gullible, as he may have appeared. In a letter written shortly after the Congress to Albert Way, John Henry Parker, who had admitted having some sleep during the mummy unwrappings, noted that the Canterbury meeting has gone off brilliantly. Among other matters, he informed his correspondent that the ransackers of the graves of their ancestors were very pleased with the results of their proceedings. They're even calling themselves that. Indeed, it seems that this first ever association field week impressed most of those who had attended. Among them was Thomas Bateman of Middleton by Yulgrave, Derbyshire. Charles Roach Smith
I've been there.
wrote of Bateman in his retrospectives that the Canterbury Congress introduced him to the world. So in other words, Bateman's the next guy we're going to look at, but not today. That's the lecture over and done with today. We're not going to do Little Neg because it would take us up until a 1:30, and we'll do that again. So what we're going to do, we're going to find out if there's any questions. Oh yeah, I've got an announcement. Oh, flipping heck, hang on a minute. Let's just sort of stop the share. Good, and we're back. I would like to mention that anyone who sent the monies over to the account, thank you very much. I think maybe one of you needs to pay your class fees, which is £50 for the next 2 months. Because
on the way tomorrow, Carl.
Oh, Del, you didn't have to mention it was you.
It's always
No,
me.
I paid mine last night.
I know you did, Anne, and I do believe Goff has paid, and I do believe that Henry has paid, and I think Adam as well. Have you paid? Because the figures ain't. Have you done your doings, Adam?
Yeah, done it.
And Richard, have you chucked your shekels in as well?
Yeah.
He's not talking to us now that I've mentioned money.
He
It's in
is.
your account now.
Oh, well done, Dickie. Right. Oh, okay. Talking about Dickie. Dickie, have you got anything you want to say?
No, quite interesting subject.
That's good. I'm glad you liked it, Dickie. What about Goffy Babes?
That was very interesting. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. What about wonderful Adam?
Yeah, that was great. I was just thinking on what you were saying earlier about data and the internet and the fallibility of that and the solidity of books. I'm just wondering if you think in the future we're going to have sort of technological archaeologists digging through old data and things that you can't usually get access to. What do you think to that?
Oh yeah. That's a point.
Right. Actually, right. Okay. You want my answer? My answer is I hope not, because I'm hoping that another technology, I'm hoping that something else will come. I'm hoping that something will save us from this mess that you've just described. Because there's only so much you can back things up on a hard drive. There's only so many copies of things you can keep. Do you know what, right? The problem is, back in the day, right, you've got a book, right? Today, you've got a copy of something on your desktop. You've got something on a USB stick, the same thing. You've got something on a hard drive. You've got so many copies of the same thing. You don't know which is actually the one you want to look at, right? So the problem is what we're looking at is over an absolute dearth of material when we're only wanting to look at what is actually there. And if we are looking at data digging archaeologists in the future, I'm going to say that would be criminal, but I hope it's not going to go there, Adam. I'm really fingers crossed. I'm hoping that there will be another technology. I really, really am. Anything else you want to say, Adam?
That's all good. I'm with you on that. I'm got a bit of a thing about buying up controversial books, which I may or may not go out of print soon.
Yeah, exactly. I think I know what you're talking about. Right. Right. Okay. And Adam, can you just hang on at the end? I just need to talk to you about something briefly. Goff, anything you'd like to say, lovely? Oh, you've already done it. Right. Yeah. I just wanted to hear Goff's voice again. I'm a bit of a perv like that. Right. Del, anything you want to say, love?
No, that was good. It's nice to be back again. I keep forgetting when the meetings are these days. But yeah. And again, with repeating what Adam says about technology, I mean, we subscribe to some sort of cloud thing where a lot of our storage is. But as I've always said, one day it's going to rain and the cloud's gone.
Do you know what? Do you know what? That is a brilliant analogy. Can we just discuss that a minute? That's a brilliant analogy. I'm not at all puddle martyr. You know, I use my mobile phone for basically everything, right? But it can't be used to keep everything. You know, there's 2 points there. I lost. I thought I'd lost a little SD card for my phone. Basically, I had a paddy with my phone. I chucked her across the room, and my card flew out. Anyway, eventually found it, and then I realised that I was so dependent upon this tiny little SD card. It had thousands of images on it, right? And I just, this is ridiculous. And what Dell said is exactly right. It will rain one day, and the other thing as well is all this data is held in massive computers somewhere, right? So we're told. So if we think about this logically, if it's held in a computer and that computer's switched off, then we've lost everything. So why didn't you just keep it on your own computer? Why is somebody else controlling your data? There's all those questions. And what I want is that I want to avoid what Dell said, and I want to avoid what Adam said. And I'm really hoping that something will happen. Something will happen. Basically, I know we got Anne to ask and Henry, but we started recording things on records, and records can still be heard. Recordings from records can still be heard from the late Victorian period, right? And then we've got wax cylinders that need to use a lot of technology, and then we've got reels of film, right? So, but those records can still be even slightly distorted, but those records can still be understood, right? And maybe if you go with what somebody said once, if you think about cup and ring marks, the rings on cup and Neolithic ring marks give a resonance. Maybe that's a way of recording things. We don't really know enough, and I think we're running too fast into disaster, and it's a shame. And I was asked recently by somebody in the Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, why didn't you look at some of the stuff online and sort of correct it? And I'm thinking, if I correct it, somebody else is going to correct it back. I can't be asked. If it's written if it's written in a book, then nobody can change that and alter that. Right, Henry, anything you'd like to say?
Oh, just a couple of things.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
Is it 2 or 3?
Your skeleton is 6 foot tall, 1.8 meters.
Bloody hell.
And unfortunately, they can't actually do any DNA analysis on him due to the fact that they stuck him in the bone glue.
But there is one thing that I would say: if they hadn't done that, then the body would not be with us today. So
absolutely true. The other one,
I'm not going to go with that. Go on.
Your grandfather demolishing the barrows on the St. Athan site. I've had a look at the map from 1888, pre-RAF. There isn't one barrow on that site.
Right. Okay.
But there is the remains of the West Orchard Castle.
Oh.
But if you one point I would make is when they were developing the estate at St. Athan, right? They found hundreds of barrows that had been flattened.
Oh.
Can you remember that, Goff? A few years back, they found lots of human remains.
Yeah.
So actually, it's unusual, Henry. It's unusual, Henry, that you're telling us that there's nothing marked on the maps, but we do have the evidence for them. And I'm rather curious why they weren't marked on the maps.
Because they are marked everywhere else around.
Oh my God, this is really interesting stuff. What map? This is so we know from the work at St. Athan when they were putting the estate up that there was loads of sets of human remains and barrows and all the rest of it, but none of that's on the maps. That really intrigues me. Was this on the NLS map?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. And yes, good. Yeah, I'm going to get into that. That's a curious thing. What I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to justify anything, Henry, but we do know that when they built the estate of St. Athan just a few years ago, that lots of human remains were found associated with barrows and all the rest of it, but they've been flattened. We know. So what I've done, I've inferred that and said about all these runway fields and so on. But you're saying that and the stuff at the runway fields were not marked on the Ordnance Survey maps. I actually think that's a really intriguing. I really, really do. And I'm glad you.
Carl,
I'm glad you. Go on.
I think they'd already been ploughed out.
And then there's the other thing about them being ploughed out
So
as well.
obviously,
Yeah.
when they're level, they're not going to be on a Ordnance Survey map.
And that's the other point as well.
But then you're going to discover them when you begin to dig foundations for houses.
Yeah.
You are going to find obviously the remains then.
Good point. Good point.
This is a really this is a good point in itself. I think we need to come back to this. We do. Thanks for that, my learned friend Henry. We're gonna come back to this. This is a good discussion. Right, Henry, anything else you want to say?
No, I think I've done enough damage now.
No, you haven't. You haven't done any. I think that's intriguing. I love mysteries like this. I really, really do. You were defending my granddad. I'm not. Right, okay. Who else have we got left? We got Anne. Anything you would like to say, Anne?
No, just I can see that we have to have data for, study, because you can't afford to buy books all the time. That's always been the problem is how many books can you afford to get? So you usually get about half a dozen or 3, and then you have to go online for a lot of stuff, because otherwise it would exclude people from studying, wouldn't it?
And that's why we've got libraries.
Libraries.
That's why we've got libraries.
Yeah, libraries as well.
Don't need to
They
buy
all
books.
got libraries at colleges and universities, and
We-
there's
we all-
the books, I think.
We all need to use our libraries, Anne. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's
But
nothing like a
anyway,
good old book.
it was it had a nice atmosphere to your talk. I was like there.
I'm glad you were there. I'm glad you were there. It's a shame we didn't have Bill this evening, but at least we were there. Right. Okay then. So, are there any other questions from Goff, Richard, Henry, Dell, and Adam before we go? I just want a quick chat with you, Adam, at the end. Anyone else want to say anything else?
Oh, bye-bye.
Anyway, see you next week, Goff.
Bye-bye.
See you,
Bye, everyone.
Richard. See you, Dell.
Bye, all.
See you, Anne. See you, Henry.
Yeah,
Frenchman.
just a quick one. Your skeleton man.
Yeah.
They've identified that his dagger that they found him with, the composition of the iron actually came from southwestern Ireland,
Oh, bugger.
and he had a whalebone pommel on it.
Ah, that's not that. I'm glad you come up with that, and it's great that we've got these artifacts as one collection. That is really, really nice. So that was from Ireland. So, did you say it was bronze or iron?
Hold on, I need to read the.
We just need to see if it's a bronze or an iron age burial.
Is made of bronze.
So it's bronze age burial. Exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Nice. Thank you for that. And also, I'd like to ask you. When we get to this, we get to this sort of poem at the end, right? It mentions an Ulster king. What is that?
Ulster is one of the counties.
No, I know it's a county in Ireland, but what is an Ulster king? That's your research.
I'll have a look.
Give you the context as well. Give you the context. It came in. It says Sir William Beetham, of course, too was with them. It's nothing without Ulster King.
Hmm.
Is it a drink?
Okay.
I don't know.
Don't know.
I don't know. Don't know. It's a bit. But I think that's really cryptic about the that you looked at the map and I think that was a good point that Richard made, and it was a good point that you made. And obviously the stuff in St. Athan, you're thinking there's something really strange about that. And actually you made another point. There's barrows everywhere else, but not in that area. Something really odd.
Yeah, have a look, and it's strange because I had a good look around.
Yeah, because when you look at Wick, they're all over the place, and when you look at Lantwick, they're all over the place. Exactly.
They are. So they haven't been ploughed out there.
No. That's a really good point. Okay, that's brilliant.
I'll leave you both. Have a good
Thank
one.
you. Thank you very much, Henri. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Adios.
See you next week. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. 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 Right. Okay. We'll get this off recording. It sort of does involve you, what I'm about to say. So I'm going to get this off. Hang on. Just going to see if there's anything in the chat box. Nothing in the chat box. And anyway, everyone watching, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this week. And everybody obviously enjoyed it. That question at the end. I like a trip you up thing. Anyway, the thing is, Adam, am I trying to justify what I've said, or am I just... No, I'm not. I'm thinking somebody's saying it's not on maps, but we've got evidence that was excavated at St. Athan. And I'm saying that, yeah, right, okay. Well, I think we need to look into this one. Anyway, we'll leave the recording now. So anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And